Hi, Denise from Fourth Grade Microfarm. This is my first official episode behind the wheel for hand spinning. Today I just want to talk about, really briefly, the drafting zone, how to get yarns that are the size that you want, and 2 tips to how I get my yarns various sizes. Okay, first of all, one of the things that you'll hear or you've heard a lot from spinners is that when a new spinner makes a bulky yarn, they're often told, enjoy that bulky yarn while you can because you won't be able to go back to that. And I always found that philosophy a little silly. Sorry, you guys, but I did. Okay, now, first of all, the reason why I found it odd is because it's the spinner that controls the thickness of the yarn. For me, as a production spinner and as a spinner for trade, I have to be able to produce the yarns that are correct for whatever the pattern is that I'm making, and also for whatever the grower requests. So if I get a bunch of alpaca and the grower wants it bulky or worsted weight, I have to be able to produce that size for them. And also, I want to be able to produce those sizes in production spinning without spinning up a whole lot of extra and going 3, 4, 5 plies or whatever in order to get the thickness that I want. Most of the time I work with 2-ply yarns. The yarns I send out are 2-ply yarns. People are okay with 2-ply yarns. So I want to be able to spin this up in a 2-ply yarn and get the thickness that I want. And so I have to be able to do that. Now, it is true that as you spin longer and longer, you're going to get a muscle memory for a particular yarn. And the yarn does get spinner because you have a finer motor control over what you're actually drafting. But keep in mind that you have the control over what you're drafting. So the same way that as you progress, you can draft out thinner and thinner yarns is the same way that you can control to build up and make thicker yarns if you so desire. How do you do that? Well, what you're spinning, the thickness of the yarn, is all dependent on how much fiber is in the drafting zone. So as a spinner, what you have to do is have the muscle memory and the eye memory for how much fiber you need to allow into the drafting zone in order to make the thickness yarn that you want for a 2-ply yarn. For example, here's some of my favorite Jacob. Kind of should have used the fin, that way you would have seen it better. But here's the Jacob. Here's my drafting zone, that triangle drafting zone. And as I pull out to draft, I see that if I pull out a thin amount of fiber and I twist it, I'm going to get a thin single. And the thinner the amount of fiber is in that drafting zone, the thinner my single is, the thinner my resulting 2-ply yarn is going to be. Well, if I want a thicker yarn, then I simply allow more. See, this little bit here is all I allow. I'm allowing much more in my drafting zone. So when I twist my yarn, I'm going to have a thicker single. And just as when you're spinning, you're beginning spinning, and you're learning how to draft out evenly so you don't have so many slubs, what you're doing is you're learning how to control the exact amount that comes out every time you draft. Well, it's the same thing here, is that you set in your mind the thickness of what you want to come out. And as you progress, you get that hand memory for how much you're letting out. So all you have to do, if you want a thicker yarn, is to allow more yarn into the drafting zone. So then your next question is, well, how do I know how much I want into the drafting zone? And there are 2 ways that I achieve the thickness of the yarn that I want. The first one is my leader. Either on my wheel or my spindle, I always have a leader. The leader helps me so that I don't go into autopilot, because I know that happens a lot of times when you're spinning. You just free flowing, you go into autopilot, and next thing you know, you're spinning your default weight. So in order to start me out right, I have a leader. And this is the leader that is on my spindle. And if you look down here, here we go. It's a very thin piece of sewing thread. And the sewing thread gives me the idea for the yarn that I'm spinning on this spindle. Not this one right here, because this is different. But underneath this yarn is a whole nother project. And so I didn't wind it out the spindle. I just spun right over top of it. And so anyway, the yarn underneath there is very thin, and I'm using this as my leader. So I wanted the singles that I spun to be approximately this thickness, so when I applied them up, they would be a lace weight. Okay. I do the same for my spinning wheel. I'll take either one of my own threads or a commercial worsted weight, split it, and then spin it, or use it as the leader and spin on top of that. So that gives me a pretty good idea. I also have a spinner's control car, and this is like my favorite thing in the whole world. You know, if you're free floaty artsy yarn, maybe this is not really your thing, but for me, I kind of like, you know, put my yarns where they need to be. So I have the spinner's control card, and basically what it is it's a list of different yarn weights. They're approximate wraps per inch. Everybody's wraps per inch list, they vary a lot by 3 or 4 wraps or so. So just kind of pick your wrap per inch and stick with it. Whichever one you use, the Revelry one is nice too. But anyway, what you do is you spin the first few inches. You lay your fiber in the groove. Okay. And what you're trying to do is match the groove. Oh, there we go. You want to match that groove so that if your fiber fits in that groove, when you ply it, it will be approximately the weight that is listed above. So this is the size for a single for a 2-ply yarn to become a fingering weight yarn. And after I spin on the wheel the first couple inches or so, I will check my single, see if it fits in the groove, ply back on itself, and see if I've got the approximately right yarn for the 2-ply yarn. Basically, that's how I control my drafting so that I can make the yarn that I want to fit the project that I need. Thanks for listening. Hope to see you again.